For years, Song Hye-kyo seemed almost untouchable, the kind of actress whose face could sell romance, sorrow, luxury, and national fantasy all at once. She was not just famous in South Korea, she became one of the defining faces of Hallyu itself. The woman audiences across Asia had watched cry, love, lose, and endure through some of the most iconic dramas of her generation. Her beauty looked timeless, her image looked controlled, and her silence often made her feel even more powerful. On the surface, she was everything celebrity culture loves most: elegant, elusive, and endlessly watchable. But that is exactly what made the obsession around her so dangerous. Because the more perfect a woman looks in public, the more brutally people react when they sense even the smallest crack in the image. And Song Hye-kyo's image was never just admired, it was monitored. Every relationship became a headline, every expression became a reading, every appearance became evidence for whatever story the public wanted to tell about her next. She was praised like a goddess when the fantasy held, then dissected the moment it changed shape. The same country that celebrated her as one of Korea's great screen icons also turned her private life into public theater. The tax controversy, the whispers, the marriage that looked like a fairy tale, the divorce that exploded like a national event. What makes her story so compelling is not simply that she became famous. It is that fame around her never stayed passive. People did not just watch Song Hye-kyo, they projected onto her. Desire, envy, protection, suspicion, resentment. She carried all of it at once. That is why her story begins here, at the point where adoration and cruelty are almost impossible to separate. Because Song Hye-kyo is not only the story of a woman who became beautiful enough to be worshipped. She is the story of what happens when a woman becomes so iconic that the public starts believing they own her narrative. Before the early struggles, before the breakthrough, before the rise into Hallyu royalty, there is this question sitting at the center of everything. How does someone become the face a nation never stops watching, and still survive what that gaze does to her? In Song Hye-kyo's world, the spotlight was never just light. It was pressure. And long before it made her legendary, it made her vulnerable. Long before Song Hye-kyo became the face of heartbreak, grace, and impossible beauty on screen, she was a girl growing up far from the mythology that would later surround her. She was born in 1981, and from the very beginning, her story did not unfold like the life of someone destined to become untouchable. There was nothing in those early years that looked like a grand prophecy. What existed instead was something quieter. A child growing up with her mother, a girl learning discipline early, and a life that moved forward without the kind of glamorous narrative people often project backward onto stars. That matters, because when the public looks at someone like Song Hye-kyo later, it becomes easy to imagine she was always meant to be adored. But fame almost never feels inevitable when you are still living inside the ordinary years that come before it. Her entry into the industry came early enough to shape her identity before adulthood had fully arrived. In 1996, she won the Sun Kyung Smart Model contest, and that moment opened a door she was still too young to fully understand. It was not just a competition win. It was the beginning of a life in which cameras would stop being occasional objects and start becoming permanent witnesses. She began appearing in television in small roles, and like many future stars, she first moved through the edges of attention before stepping into the center of it. Those early appearances matter because they reveal something essential about Song Hye-kyo's later image. She did not explode into fame from nowhere. She was shaped by years of being watched, tested, and slowly folded into the machinery of Korean entertainment. That slow beginning also explains why her presence later felt so controlled. She did not become poised overnight. She grew up inside an industry that teaches people very quickly how to hold a face, how to manage a pause, how to speak just enough and no more. Even before the massive dramas, before the Hallyu wave carried her across Asia, Song Hye-kyo was already learning one of the hardest lessons of celebrity. The public will always look at your surface first, and you will spend years deciding how much of your real self gets to live beneath it. In her case, the answer became part of her mystique. She stayed reserved. She stayed careful. She learned how to let the image speak before the person did. And maybe that is why the world later became so obsessed with reading meaning into every silence she kept. This stage of her life is easy to romanticize because it comes before the bigger pressure, before the national scrutiny, before the relationships and scandals that would later define so much public conversation around her. But it should not be romanticized too much. Being discovered early is not only a blessing, it is also a kind of theft. It takes the anonymous years away. It turns youth into preparation. And in Song Hye-kyo's case, it meant that by the time the public thought they were discovering her, the process of being shaped for public consumption had already begun.
Everything changed when Song Hye-kyo stopped being a young actress with promise and became a face the entire region could not forget. Autumn in My Heart was the turning point. It did not just make her more famous, it fixed her image in the emotional imagination of a generation. Suddenly, Song Hye-kyo was no longer simply pretty, reserved, and camera-friendly. She became the face of sadness, longing, sacrifice, and that very specific kind of Korean melodrama that made people cry across borders. The role gave her something more powerful than buzz. It gave her emotional authority. Audiences did not just watch her, they felt through her. And once an actress reaches that level of emotional association, fame changes shape. It stops being about recognition and starts becoming about emotional ownership. People begin to feel that the star belongs to their memory, their heartbreak, their ideal of love. That emotional power only expanded. All in showed that she was not limited to one mood or one archetype. Then Full House transformed her again, proving she could step out of tragedy and carry something brighter, more playful, and irresistibly romantic without losing her magnetism. This was the stage when Song Hye-kyo stopped being a beloved actress and started becoming something closer to Hallyu royalty. She was now one of the central faces of Korea's cultural export machine, and her image traveled easily because it carried two things international audiences respond to immediately: beauty and emotional clarity. She could look delicate without seeming weak, and she could look controlled without becoming cold. That balance made her unusually durable in an industry where women are often forced into narrow categories and discarded the moment they no longer fit them perfectly. As the years passed, that durability became one of her greatest strengths. She did not vanish after one era of dramas. She kept returning, and each return added another layer to her mythology. That winter, The Wind Blows, restored the melancholic elegance people associated with her best. Then, Descendants of the Sun pushed her back into a new kind of global phenomenon, introducing her to younger audiences while reminding older ones why they had never really stopped watching. That is what separates a temporary star from a cultural figure: the ability to survive changing eras without losing symbolic weight. Song Hye-kyo was no longer just a successful actress with a list of famous dramas. She had become one of the defining faces of Korean soft power itself, someone whose screen image carried national prestige as much as personal fame. But this level of success comes with a hidden cost. When an actress becomes that iconic, she stops being treated like a normal performer and starts being treated like a public symbol. Every role reinforces the myth. Every appearance protects or threatens it. Every silence becomes meaningful. Song Hye-kyo's rise into Hallyu royalty was not only a career triumph, it was the beginning of a more dangerous kind of visibility, the kind that makes the public feel entitled not just to admire your work, but to interpret your life. And once that happens, success is no longer simply a victory. It becomes a standard you are expected to embody all the time, whether your private life can carry that weight or not.
By the time Song Hye-kyo reached the highest level of fame, the public was no longer looking at her the way it looks at ordinary actresses. She was no longer simply being judged for performances, ratings, or beauty. She was being measured against an idea. In Korea, there are stars who become famous, and then there are stars who become symbols of national elegance, women whose faces stop belonging only to the screen and start belonging to the public imagination. Song Hye-kyo had become one of those women. That sounds glamorous, and in many ways it was. But glamour at that level comes with a hidden cruelty. Once people decide you are the embodiment of perfection, they stop allowing you the freedom to be human. Every public appearance must look flawless. Every interview must sound composed. Every silence must be read as dignity, not distance. And every mistake becomes bigger precisely because the image around you has been built to look so clean. This is where the pressure around Song Hye-kyo started to take on a sharper edge. She was part of the famous Taehyeji trio, a category that did not just praise beauty, it institutionalized it. To be placed in that category was to be turned into a benchmark, and benchmarks are never left alone. The public compared, ranked, admired, envied, and watched constantly. Song Hye-kyo's face was no longer just her face. It had become a standard of femininity inside Korean celebrity culture. That kind of visibility is powerful, but it is also exhausting, because people stop asking what you want and start asking whether you are still living up to what they need you to represent. In her case, the demand was especially intense because she had built her image on restraint. She did not overshare. She did not constantly explain herself. She let the screen carry her emotions and let the public do the rest. But when a woman says less, the culture often fills the silence with its own projections, and that is exactly what happened around her. Then came the kind of scandal that hits hardest when a celebrity has spent years appearing immaculate. In 2014, reports emerged that Song Hye-kyo had underpaid taxes in earlier years, and although she later paid the full amount plus penalties and explained that the problem came through her accountant, the damage was immediate. The issue was not only financial, it was symbolic. A woman whose image had been built on grace, discipline, and control suddenly found herself associated with a controversy that made people question the integrity beneath the polish. In celebrity culture, facts matter, but image matters faster. Once the story is out, the emotional effect arrives before the explanation does. And for Song Hye-kyo, the emotional effect was harsh because the public reaction was not just about taxes, it was about disappointment. The more idealized a star becomes, the less mercy they receive when the image slips. What makes this part of her story so important is that it reveals the trap hidden inside perfection. Song Hye-kyo was not collapsing in public the way some stars do. She was still composed, still beautiful, still working, still admired. But the crack had been made visible. And once a crack becomes visible in someone that iconic, people never quite look at them the same way again. They start reading more aggressively, suspecting more quickly, and attaching deeper meanings to ordinary choices. This is the stage where Song Hye-kyo's story stops being only about success and starts becoming about surveillance. Not legal surveillance, but emotional surveillance. The constant public watching that follows women who are too famous, too beautiful, and too symbolically loaded to be left alone. That is the real price of perfection. Not that it is hard to achieve, but that once you are seen as perfect, every flaw becomes a national event. If Descendants of the Sun made Song Hye-kyo look untouchable again, what came after made her look more exposed than ever. The chemistry was too strong, the timing was too perfect, and the fantasy was too easy for the public to fall into. On screen, she and Joong-ki looked like a romance built to survive war, distance, and fate. Off-screen, when news of their relationship and marriage arrived, it felt like the drama had escaped the script and entered real life. For fans, it was irresistible. For the media, it was gold. And for Song Hye-kyo, it meant that her private life was no longer simply hers. It had become a national love story people felt emotionally invested in, protective of, and entitled to judge. That is the danger of a romance built under that much public light. Once people fall in love with the story, they stop seeing the people inside it clearly. The wedding in 2017 did not feel like a private union between two actors. It felt like an event the entire culture had been invited to witness. Every photograph, every guest, every dress detail, every expression was analyzed with the intensity usually reserved for royalty. But fairy tales built in public are fragile, because the audience that helps create them also expects them to remain beautiful forever. When the marriage began to fracture, the silence around it became unbearable. Then came 2019, and the split arrived with the force of a detonation. Joong-ki filed for divorce, and what should have been a private ending instantly became another national spectacle. Headlines multiplied. Rumors spread. Blame moved faster than facts. And once again, Song Hye-kyo found herself inside a story the public wanted to tell about her before she had fully spoken for herself. That is what makes this chapter so painful. It was not only the end of a marriage, it was the collapse of a fantasy millions of people had helped build and then watched burn. What followed revealed the most ruthless side of celebrity culture. Divorce in public is already brutal. Divorce under the pressure of Korea's entertainment ecosystem becomes something harsher. A battleground of rumors, innuendo, online cruelty, and endless attempts to reduce a woman's life into a moral lesson. Song Hye-kyo became the target of an avalanche of speculation. Much of it invasive, some of it false, all of it amplified by the fact that her image had always been so carefully held. When a woman has spent years being presented as controlled and elegant, the public reacts violently to any event that seems to suggest disorder underneath. And that was the real cruelty of this moment. The same image that had protected her for years now made the fallout heavier. People did not just mourn the marriage, they dissected her through it. Reports later noted that she took legal action against malicious rumors and defamation, which says everything about how ugly the atmosphere had become. She was not simply surviving heartbreak. She was surviving a public appetite for narrative that would not let her grieve in peace. And yet that is exactly why the ending of this part matters so much. Because Song Hye-kyo did not rebuild by begging the public to understand her. She rebuilt by returning to the work. The glory did not feel like a timid comeback or a soft reintroduction. It felt like a woman stepping back into the frame with a colder, harder, more dangerous kind of authority. The softness that had defined so much of her earlier image was still there somewhere, but it no longer led. What led now was control sharpened by survival. That is what makes the arc so powerful. After the marriage, after the divorce, after the scrutiny, after the cruelty, Song Hye-kyo did not come back trying to restore the fantasy. She came back having outlived it. And maybe that is the strongest version of her story. Not the goddess people projected onto, not the bride inside a national fairy tale, but the woman left standing after the illusion had been stripped away.